What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you guys are well. Got a interesting comment that brother sent to me. Thought he would share. Appreciated him for doing so. And I just thought I'd give a couple of thoughts about it. I imagine that some of y'all who are regular listeners might have a few things to say about it as well. Right? And coming from a PK, it's particularly interesting to me in terms of the state of black men. So this was the post that I was sent. I'm not sure whose YouTube comment section it was, but I found it interesting. So it says, basically, I was at a huge black church. The bishop said, "Single brothers, stand up." We stood. He said, "Single mothers, stand up." They stood. And then he said, "Brothers, I need y'all to man up and marry these good sisters." Myself and about 13 other brothers left and never went back. Wow. That is powerful. And I'm saying that because I came up in an era where by the time I was 12 years old, whenever I imagined my future, here's the thing. I never imagined marrying someone and having kids. I always imagined that I would marry someone who already had kids. And maybe I would be lucky enough for her to decide to give me one or two before she shut down the factory. Why did I think that by the age of 12? Because I had already been hearing that. I'd already been hearing that on a regular basis. In the black community in the 1980s, it was common to see black men with multiple kids. Hell, I came up in a single parent household. I knew several father figures over that time period. Some I never saw again. Some I came to know later in life when I grew into manhood and sought them out myself. But at the end of the day, seeing men step in and take a stepfather role was common. So common, in fact, that we aligned it with the very definition of what it meant to be a good black man. We didn't question whether or not there needed to be any critique toward women who were having kids out of wedlock. We assumed that was, what's the term they use now for it? It escapes me at the moment. But we were, that would be uncouth. That would be, trying to look good for white folk, right? That would all be about presenting a certain set of politics as opposed to embracing and accepting life for what it is. But in all of those different dimensions, we never actually asked black men what they thought. Black men were just assumed to take it. And see, all of this is a product, right, of a series of policies. See, this thing I keep coming back to, people don't hear me. I'm not talking about relationships. I'm not a relationship counselor. I'm not bashing black women because I'm trying to make money or get likes on Facebook or YouTube subscriptions. No, I'm talking about the intergenerational impact of policy on the black family. You want to talk about white supremacy? Talk about white supremacy in regard to policy. And how do those policies affect the black community? Well, there's a number of these policies and they intersected at the same time. From the switch of the family court, right? At a time period when they started to basically prioritize women as the primary custody adherents or custody receivers, I should say, of the children, to around the same time period where you had birth control being released, right? All around the same 5 to 10 year period, right? Unprecedented access to control of their bodies. At the same time, having nearly unprecedented access to deferment in family court in terms of child support, in terms of custody issues, and in terms of even alimony, even though alimony was less pronounced. But at the end of the day, it's still overwhelmingly nodded toward women. All of these things taking place at the same time. And of course, we have to talk about the various types of policies that provided women security independent of men. And in fact, penalize them if they got state support with men in the home. All of these kinds of policies brought together changed the behavior and the worldview of people in the black community. It taught men that they were essentially valueless and had no purpose and weren't essential to families other than being sperm donors and occasional daddies, stepdaddies to kids that weren't their own. And then it taught women that they could rely on the state. They could rely on, and hell, one of the things we're going through now is we're seeing a massive shift in private industry starting to invest in those very same black women. Again, independent of black men, regardless of what black men achieve or fail, they get no support. But the state and now private industry, and we talked about this with Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, Google, Visa, and a number of others, stepping forth from the private industry to do the same thing. And those kind of investments are gentrifying the black community in a whole new way. And what it's doing to the black family is reasserting the notion that men are just utilities, sperm donors at that. And that was the impact. Going from the 70s into the 80s, the impact was now you had a rising number of single mothers. And of course, you had the rise of the carceral industry. You know, the carceral industry, meaning that black men went to prison in unprecedented numbers. Mass unemployment, right? Jobs locating overseas right around the same times the drugs are kicking up in the community as one of the primary points of access for people to make income with no prior training. Schools are in the shitter, no opportunities. And as soon as these young black males touch those drugs, they go to jail if they don't die. All of these things intersected at the same time. And what came out of it was a black family where black men were transient and expendable. That was the shift in the perception of black men, or at least the crystallization of an attitude. Same attitude that produced, I don't need a man, niggas ain't shit. All of those things congealed into expendable men. And now you had generations of young girls and boys learning that men were expendable. Boys learned, and I was one of them. This is why I imagined being a stepfather. What I didn't know I was learning was that all I was somebody that can be picked and thrown away at her discretion whenever she chose. And once that happened, if it needed to go to family court, 9 times out of 10, it would be ruled in her benefit or to her benefit. That's what I learned. So children growing up during this time period, boys learned they were expendable. Girls learned that they had the option of choice. They could control their bodies. They could misrepresent birth control. And if they had to go to family court, even if they weren't married, they could get support. Matter of fact, some got predatory about that support, but that's not the focus of the broadcast. So this is what we learned. And I thought it would always be this way. But looking at this post, I'm surprised because now what I'm seeing are black men that are actually saying, no more. And at that, when you look at the role of the black church as one of the major institutions in the community, I mean, hell, this was the institution that everything from social to aesthetic, you know, the musical geniuses that came out of the mid 20th century and beyond, and even the politics of the black community, all of this came out of the church because it was the only place we could congregate. Now, what does it turn into? A space of shaming for men, a space of prioritizing or hyper prioritizing women's needs and interests because it's profitable. And men have stepped away from the church for the last few decades because they have no voice. Yeah, there may be a male pastor, but he doesn't speak for the men. He speaks to the women. And that's what this man in this particular clip is pointing to. Even the way that was carried out, like meat on a plate, these men are to be served up and not served up to women that they may have something in common with women that have interest in. He specifically states single mothers. As if black men can't choose for themselves if they even want to be in a ready-made family. Just had a conversation with my son about this last night. We were watching Aaron Brockovich. I was introducing him to various conversations about environmental pollution. And the reason we watched that film is because it was about California. So everything in it was only a couple hours away from where we live. But I had to keep stopping the movie, even though it wasn't about black folk, to talk about the role of men and how they're perceived and what the relationships can end up being in relation to single mothers. That's mostly whom I've dated after my wife passed. I was always expecting to, even as a child, but I never actually thought about why, how it came about, where all of this came from, and whether or not men had a goddamn choice about what they stand for, what they choose to stand for, and what they want to do with their lives. That was never introduced as a fucking option. Men were never told they could choose. We were told what we were supposed to do, as black men in particular. What we were supposed to do. It was implied, it was suggested. Nobody ever talked to us about choice. When I grew up, nobody ever sat me down and said, this is what comes when you make this decision. I learned about it in movies, but I still had no one to talk to about it. Nobody ever sat me down like I did with my son last night and tell him, this is what happens when you fall in love with a woman's child or children and stay with her for the wrong reasons. This is what can happen when a woman sees that you're in love with her children and decides that you're a useful tool. And I'm not saying that that's the only way that single mothers get down, but it's a dynamic that nobody ever sat me down and prepared me for. The weaponization of children, the weaponization of her interests, the weaponizations of her desperation if she's in a situation where she needs help and may see a sucker on the horizon. I don't know. But even in a relationship that is positive, that is constructive, that is functional, what are the things that you need to be concerned about, especially as a young man? Getting tied into something quickly? I mean, I remember at 17, 18 years old, I was dating women who were in their late 20s and early 30s that had 10-year-old children. And I thought I was ready for that because that's all I'd really seen, men getting with women that already had kids. And finding out I knew nothing and was nowhere near prepared for what often not only these single mothers, but older women had an understanding of. She was looking at me for support in ways that I hadn't even begun to craft for myself yet. And when she could pass you up for someone that had more resources, if nobody's prepared you for this, you're all kind of confused. Now, I know I focused on the negatives, and I'm not saying that's all there is. But I am saying those are things that nobody prepared me for as a young man. All I was told was this Walt Disney narrative. Find a woman, fall in love, be with her. And if she had 3 kids already, you might even be shamed if you thought about not dating her because of that, because you're not ready to be a father, or because you choose to raise children that are your own, or, God forbid, you actually don't want kids. All of those things are okay, but black men in particular are not told that. They're not supported in that way. What we're taught, especially by primarily female-led households, is that we need to prioritize her feelings, her interests, and her needs, even when she doesn't exist yet. As a young man, when you're prepared for life and what you might want to do in terms of coupling in your life, you might mimic what you see. Especially if you're coming out of a single parent household, you might associate this future woman or woman that you do meet with your mother. So you're already kind of bent in a particular way. But very little conversation with actual men. So even now, I have students that are literally walking themselves into long-term debt around supporting women that already have kids, and they haven't even stopped to reflect on whether or not they understand the full ramifications of that choice. I mean, I can't tell you how many grown black men I know that have symbolic children with women over generations. I mean, and I shouldn't say over generations, but I mean in multiple contexts, meaning you got like a couple of sets of stepkids. You may even be paying child support, and they may not be yours biologically. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's the path you choose. But that's a very different thing from when someone sits you down and prepares you for what the options are that come with each choice. And you can make that choice intelligently. When no one's done that, and everything you see and hear in your own community tells you to do these things uncritically, that's a problem. So what I applaud these black men for doing in this church is actually saying, no, that's not what we want. And having the nerve to stand up and do it. And to not be shamed or bullied into doing something that they don't want to do. I'm not applauding them just because they left and gave an FU to an institution. No, I'm applauding them because they took the time and the care in their own lives. They cared enough about their own lives, their own decisions to say that's not what we want. And more so, the fact that you didn't even ask these men, you didn't even give them voice. This this bishop who told them to man up, implying that not marrying a single mother makes you less of a man, right? And then they need to marry these good sisters, never even asking what it is these black men want. What are their concerns? What are their values? What are their issues? What are the kind of things that they hold dear? What kind of things might they want to correct in their own family line? Did any of that make the discussion? No, just a whole lot of shaming. Until the institutions, be they religious, political, social, doesn't matter to me, cultural even, until the institutions that we hold dear begin to actually invest in what Black men are talking about, thinking about, making decisions about, until they actually take the time to ask Black men what they want and why, try to understand where Black men are coming from. Until that happens, I have no problem welcoming Black men. Stand up and walk the fuck out. If you find yourself being treated like you are disposable and no one gives a damn about at least asking you your thought process, I have no problem telling you, walk out. Vote with your feet. Because if people care, or if institutions care for that matter, they'll bother to look. Even corporations do that. When they want to sell to a particular demographic and they really want those dollars, they take the time to create focus groups around those groups, around those demographics, so they can understand what those demographics want more of. Oh, you want more commercials with people of color. Oh, you want us to donate more to the community and create scholarships. Okay, when you take the time to, when they take the time to ask, and the group they want to cater to articulates their needs, those corporations will do what they need to do to get the resources they want from the demographic they want it to from. So if Black men are considered a resource that anybody wants to tap into, even for their own purposes, you better goddamn well have held a focus group and figured out what it is that Black men want. If you haven't done it, I don't particularly care if you don't like the decisions Black men make. I don't care if you try to shame them all day. I'm going to tell brothers left and right, stand on your own 2 feet, make the decision that's best for you, really assess your value system, and don't let anyone make these decisions for you because they're trying to profit off you and treat you like some type of commodity without even having the decency as human beings to ask you what the hell you want. That's what I saw in this message. And I applaud these brothers for doing that. And I hope other brothers will do it in other contexts. I don't care if it's an activist organization. I don't care if it's a university. Stand up for your values, your needs, your interests, and articulate what those are. Participate in the discussions that help you develop the vocabulary to articulate your needs and concerns. And I mean that even in a relationship with an individual. If an individual is exploiting you, taking you for granted, using you for their own purposes, and not even having the wherewithal to give a damn about what you value, I have no problem telling you to first articulate your needs, and if those needs are not taken seriously, bounce. Peace.